Today we are going to talk about Marc Dutroux, a man who has written his name in bloody letters in the dark history of Europe. His name is remembered with fear and horror not only in Belgium but throughout the world. Dutroux was a serial killer who made history with his horrific crimes and terrifying intelligence. But what was it that made him so dangerous and unforgettable? The story of this man who built secret rooms under his own house, kidnapped young girls and kept them captive for years is far more terrifying than you think. If you're ready, let's enter Belgium's worst nightmare. Marc Dutroux was born on 6 November 1956 in Ixelles, Brussels, the eldest of 5 children. His parents were teachers. His parents, Victor and Jeanine, often beat him. They finally separated in 1971 when he was 15 and Marc left home and began a life of vagrancy. Dutroux worked as an electrician. He was also, according to some allegations, a sex worker. Gradually, he turned to a life of crime, selling drugs, stealing cars, and committing robberies. In this way, he saved enough money to own 7 houses. In 1976, he married his girlfriend, Françoise Dubois. By the time Dutroux was 20, he was married and had 2 sons. His wife later claimed that Dutroux beat her and had numerous extramarital affairs. They separated in 1983, and Dutroux decided to pursue one of the women he had been having an affair with. He soon married Michelle Martin, with whom he had cheated on his first wife. His second wife would become an accomplice in his crimes. By his own account, in the summer of 1985, Dutroux decided that picking up women was a boring job. Instead, with the help of his wife Michelle, he decided it would be more fun to kidnap and rape them. From now on, he would be involved in very serious crimes. He made a deal with his wife. If he didn't try to seduce other women, he would have more time for his wife because he could get things done faster. Strangely, Michelle was for it. She wanted to help Dutroux in this way, but the couple were not working alone. Jean van Petegem, a family friend, had started living in Dutroux's house after his relationship had broken down. Dutroux soon recruited van Petegem to help with his plans. The team had grown to 3. They found their first victim on 7 June 1985. They targeted 11-year-old Sylvie D., who was walking home alone after swimming in a nearby pool. As the little girl walked home, unaware of what was happening, they approached her in a minibus and grabbed her. Meanwhile, Michelle was driving the car. After putting Sylvie in the van, they taped her mouth and eyes shut. They then took Sylvie to a garage in Roux where Dutroux sexually assaulted her. Before letting her go, he took pictures of her with a Polaroid camera. This was her first attack. After that, the pace picked up. Other abductions took place in much the same way. A young woman was walking alone when she noticed a van following her. 2 men grabbed her, put her in the van, and told her they only wanted ransom money. They blindfolded her and took her to Dutroux's house. There, the girls were held captive and repeatedly raped by the 2 men, who then took them back to their neighborhood and released them. The men sometimes offered their victims treats such as chocolate and apples. Dutroux often photographed or filmed them naked. It was an extremely ruthless way of life. The police eventually caught these serial rapists because they released the people they had attacked. Jean van Petegem gave a lot of information about himself when he talked to the victims. Based on the interviews with the girls, the police were able to identify him as a suspect. During his interrogation, he immediately confessed to everything and said that Dutroux was the main culprit. In 1986, Marc Dutroux and his wife Michelle were arrested for the abduction and sexual abuse of 5 girls aged between 11 and 19. The police soon discovered a wealth of evidence against both Dutroux and van Petegem, including sexually explicit photographs and videos of the victims. In 1989, Dutroux was sentenced to 13.5 years in prison for kidnapping and rape, while his accomplices, van Petegem and Martin, were sentenced to 6.5 and 5 years respectively. But Dutroux had no intention of staying in prison. He soon convinced the prison's medical staff that he was disabled so that he could receive a monthly allowance on his release. He also persuaded a psychiatrist to prescribe him sleeping pills. He would later use these pills to put his victims to sleep. Marc Dutroux was released on parole in 1992 after serving only 3 years of his sentence. It was as if he had been released to commit more and more horrific crimes. He had already freed his victims. Now he realized it was wrong. Upon his release, Marc Dutroux wasted no time in resuming his work. He began to build a dungeon in his cellar. Here, he would lock up his kidnappers and rape them. No one would ever leave this dungeon. Between 1995 and 1996, he kidnapped at least 6 young girls. He kept them in the dungeon, where he tortured and sexually abused them. After Dutroux was released from prison, girls began disappearing one by one across the country. The police had no leads in the disappearances. Naturally, the public panicked. They tried to be more careful. On 24th of June 1995, 2 8-year-olds, Julie Lejeune and Melissa Rousseau, disappeared near their home in eastern Belgium. That same summer, on 23rd of August, teenagers Martial and Yves Lambrex disappeared while on holiday in the seaside city of Ostend. Shortly after these disappearances, Marc Dutroux's mother reported him to the police, claiming that he was holding the girls captive in one of his houses. Interestingly, despite his record of abducting and raping young girls, the police did not search his house until 5 months after the first disappearances. Dutroux was arrested again on 6 December 1995 for car theft and spent almost 4 months in prison. A week after this arrest, the police finally decided to search Dutroux's house. But although they heard children's voices, they did not even look in the basement dungeon, claiming that the noises sounded like they were coming from outside. Either the man was lucky, or the police didn't want to catch him. They also found videos and photographic films in the house showing Dutroux building the underground dungeon. It was a case of gross negligence. While Dutroux was in prison for stealing a car, his wife Michelle was responsible for feeding the children in the dungeon. But although she went to the house to feed the dogs, she was too scared to feed the girls and gave them nothing. As a result, Rousseau and Lejeune starved to death. Shortly after Dutroux's release from prison, on 28th of May 1996, 12-year-old Sabine Dardenne disappeared while cycling to school in southwest Belgium. Then, on 9th of August 1996, 14-year-old Laetitia Delhaize was abducted on her way home from a swimming pool in southeast Belgium. Some witnesses to Delhaize's abduction had seen her being taken away in a white minibus. When they gave the police the number plate of this van, it turned out to belong to Marc Dutroux, a man with a history of sexual abuse. On 13th of August, 4 days after this last kidnapping, Marc Dutroux was finally arrested for the kidnappings. Along with Dutroux, his wife Michelle and longtime accomplice Michel Lelièvre were also arrested. Marc led the police to where he was holding Sabine Dardenne and Laetitia Delhaize in a dungeon. Both were found to have been drugged and sexually abused. Both were still alive. The police also found the emaciated bodies of 8-year-old Julie Lejeune and Melissa Rousseau in another house. This was the house where the police had come earlier, ignoring the screams. Also found in the backyard of the other house was the body of Bernard Weinstein, Dutroux's accomplice, whom Dutroux had killed by burying him alive. The bodies of Martial and Yves Lambrex were found buried in the garden of Weinstein's house. They had also been buried alive. Weinstein also played a major role in the abduction and imprisonment of Martial and Lambrex. The public was shocked to learn that despite numerous tips and searches of Dutroux's house, it took the police 14 months to discover that Dutroux was behind the kidnappings. Had the crimes been solved earlier, it is possible that the 4 victims who died might have survived. But the police had been grossly negligent. The case caused such outrage that on 20th October 1996, hundreds of thousands of people took to the streets of Belgium to march in support of the victims and their families and to protest against the authorities' mishandling of the case. Over time, theories began to emerge that Dutroux was part of a larger pedophile ring involving high-ranking individuals, and that the authorities were protecting Dutroux to cover up their own crimes. In 1996, a woman named Regina Louf told investigators that at the age of 12, she was given by her parents to a family friend and taken to sex parties where powerful men tortured, raped, and sometimes killed young girls. She claimed that Dutroux brought drugs and girls to the parties. Although Louf's evidence was corroborated, local news reports labeled him a dreamer. He was not allowed to testify at Dutroux's trial. Louf's words touched someone at the top. It was like the American Epstein affair. After his arrest, Marc Dutroux also gave the authorities the name of a Belgian businessman, Jean-Michel Nihoul. Dutroux confessed that Nihul's sex trafficking gang was behind the crimes. Such a criminal network had been set up in the country that people were going crazy. People with the same surname as Dutroux quickly began to change their surnames. It took years before a date was set for Dutroux's murder trial. The authorities said this was because they were worried that conspiracy theories would lead them to look for a fake pedophile ring. Meanwhile, the Guardian newspaper reported that 20 key witnesses had mysteriously died. In April 1998, while the trial was in turmoil, Dutroux escaped from prison. Although he was soon caught, the event changed things in the country. Belgium's police chief, justice minister, and interior minister resigned. Then, in July 1999, Hubert Massa, the chief prosecutor in the case, ended his life by suicide. Finally, in March 2004, Dutroux's trial officially began in court. Marc Dutroux's trial lasted 3 months and involved hundreds of witnesses. Dutroux readily admitted the charges of kidnapping and rape, but denied involvement in the deaths of any of the girls. Sabine Dardenne and Laetitia Delhaize gave crucial testimony to the court. Dardenne said it was Dutroux who kidnapped her, that he was the only prisoner she saw during her 80 days in captivity, and that he was the only one who abused her. Delhaize said that during the 4 days he spent in captivity, Dutroux chained him to a bed and repeatedly raped him. Dutroux, meanwhile, claimed to be part of the alleged pedophile ring and portrayed himself as a pawn, not the actual perpetrator of these crimes. The prosecution found no evidence to confirm the existence of a pedophile ring. Dardenne also asked Dutroux why, if such an organization existed, he had not turned it over to the alleged pedophile ring. Dutroux replied that it depended on the girl. He said that if he had given her to Dardenne, she would have been killed. On 17th June 2004, Marc Dutroux was found guilty of rape, kidnapping, and leading a gang of kidnappers. He was also found guilty of the murders of Anne Marchal, Yves Lambrechts, and his accomplice, Bernard Weinstein. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. Michelle Martin was found guilty of the murder of 2 young girls whom she deliberately failed to feed while her husband was in prison, and was sentenced to 30 years imprisonment. 2 other accomplices, Michel Lelièvre and Michel Nioul, were also convicted. Lelièvre was sentenced to 25 years in prison and Nioul to 5 years. Marc Dutroux has applied for parole several times since his conviction. He is still being held in Nivelles prison. In 2023, Dutroux's prison house was demolished and turned into a memorial park. Also in 2022, his ex-wife and accomplice Michelle Martin was released on parole. According to some researchers, Dutroux was not only a kidnapper of girls and a self-employed man, he owned a total of 10 houses. Despite this wealth, he also received a monthly government allowance. Dutroux's lawyer said during the trial that his client was not the only culprit. In the dungeon where the victims were held, 25 unknown DNA profiles were discovered from about 6,000 hair samples. These profiles were never tested, the lawyer said. In addition, according to documents released by WikiLeaks, Dutroux's wife, Michelle Martin, received large sums of money in various currencies. The documents claimed that the couple were working for a prostitution ring. Dutroux's wealth was also attributed to this. Nihul, already a businessman, was also arrested in connection with the case. However, there were those who believed that Nihul was the mastermind behind the whole affair. Nihul had created a network with the help of his influential circle. Within this network, Dutroux and his team were responsible for the kidnapping. These accusations did not go down well in court, as Nihul was only sentenced to 5 years in prison. Moreover, the fact that Louf's confessions were ignored was a sign that the state was actually trying to cover up the incident. We have come to the end of this video. See you in another video. Don't forget to subscribe.